She walked into the church with a soft smile and a deadly secret. He was a famous pastor loved by millions, but behind closed doors, he hid a dark past. What nobody knew was she came not to serve, but to destroy him from the inside. This is the story of revenge, hidden pain, and a shocking truth that shook the city. Jasmine stood outside the massive church in Atlanta, holding her resume and her rage. She looked innocent, but her mission was clear: to ruin Pastor Calvin for what he did to her sister. Sheila's HIV positive, and today she planned to use that truth as a weapon. Church doors opened, and she stepped in like a lamb. She was a lion inside. Pastor Calvin smiled brightly as Jasmine introduced herself. He was known for hiring young women as personal assistants, charming them with kindness. Jasmine played along, acting sweet and eager to help. Inside, she was already plotting her first move. Calvin assigned Jasmine to manage his calendar, travel, and private affairs. She quickly gained his trust, always smiling and showing up early. Church members began to whisper, thinking Jasmine was just another admirer, but she kept her real feelings hidden, like poison in honey. Late one night, Jasmine stood by her bed, holding her HIV medication. She remembered her sister Monique's final words, "He ruined me." She cried silently, then made up her mind. She'd seduce him, infect him, and expose his lies. She no longer wanted justice. She wanted him to feel her sister's pain. The next few weeks, Jasmine got closer to Calvin. She learned his habits, his weaknesses, his secrets. One night, during a church retreat, Calvin invited her to his hotel suite. That night would change both their lives forever. Jasmine stood in the hotel room, her heart pounding as Calvin poured 2 glasses of wine. He complimented her beauty, his voice smooth and manipulative. She pretended to blush, hiding the storm inside her. This was the moment, and she was ready to strike. They spent the night together, Calvin believing he had won her over. But Jasmine left that room with a cold heart and a secret smile. She had given him a piece of herself he would never forget or recover from. Back at her apartment, she stood in the mirror and whispered, "For Monique." Weeks passed, and Calvin grew weak. He started losing weight and canceling church events. Doctors couldn't figure it out at first, until the test came back, HIV positive. The news broke him, but he kept it quiet. Not even his wife knew. Rumors began to swirl about mistresses, affairs, and hidden sins. Calvin's wife, Vanessa, confronted him with tears in her eyes, but he denied everything, blaming stress and overwork. Meanwhile, Jasmine kept smiling, knowing her plan was working. Vanessa hired a private investigator, desperate to know the truth. The investigator followed Calvin and caught him meeting Jasmine in secret. Photos were taken, and within days, gossip blogs exploded with scandal. The perfect image of Pastor Calvin began to crumble. Jasmine watched the news blow up with a cold calm, but her heart skipped when she saw Monique's old face trending too. People were digging. She hadn't expected them to find the past so quickly. The truth was getting too close, and she had to stay ahead. Years ago, Monique was a rising star in the youth choir. She trusted Pastor Calvin until one night after rehearsal. He invited her to his office to pray, and she came out different. She never said exactly what happened, but Jasmine saw the light leave her eyes. Monique tried to speak out, but the church shut her down. They said she was emotional, confused, and trying to ruin a man of God. Pastor Calvin called her a distraction sent by the devil. Monique left that church and never stepped back in. Monique never recovered. She dropped out of school, turned quiet, and fell into the wrong crowds. Eventually, she was diagnosed with HIV, not from Calvin, but from the life she was pushed into. Jasmine watched it all and never forgave the man who started her sister's fall. Calvin's health was failing fast, and he didn't understand why. He tried to preach, but the energy was gone. One Sunday, he collapsed on stage. The crowd screamed. Jasmine stood in the congregation, watching it all unfold. The news spread like fire.
Pastor Calvin collapses during service. Vanessa, his wife, was shaken, but something didn't feel right. Why had he been hiding medical files and dodging appointments? She began digging, and what she found would shatter everything. Vanessa confronted Jasmine after the next service. "You did this," she whispered with shaking hands. Jasmine looked her in the eyes and said, "No, I exposed what he really is." For the first time, Vanessa saw through the lies. Jasmine was arrested for intentional exposure. The church judged her instantly, but she didn't flinch. In her cell, she whispered her sister's name and felt peace. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about truth. But then others began to speak out. More women, more stories, more truth. A deeper investigation exposed years of abuse, buried by church money and power. Calvin was finally arrested, not for the sickness in his body, but for the sickness in his soul. Jasmine's charges were dropped. She stood outside the church where it all began, the same one that buried her sister's truth. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "We did it, Monique." Justice didn't heal the wound, but it stopped the bleeding. The church tried to rebuild its image, but the damage ran deep. Donors pulled out, followers left in droves. But some still defended Calvin, calling him a man under attack. Jasmine watched from afar, both disgusted and heartbroken. Vanessa filed for divorce quietly. She didn't speak to the media, just moved into her sister's home with her son. The life she thought was sacred was a lie. All she had now was silence, grief, and shame. One day, Jasmine visited Monique's grave. She brought flowers, sat on the grass, and read aloud from her favorite journal. "I finally did it," she whispered. But her voice cracked, because justice isn't the same as healing. She didn't know a young woman was watching from behind a tree. Her name was Keisha, and Calvin had hurt her too. But she never told anyone, until now. Jasmine's truth gave her the courage to finally speak. More women came forward. Churches across the city began looking inward. For once, silence didn't win, because truth had finally found a voice, in Jasmine and in every survivor. Back in prison, Calvin began to waste away. His body failed faster than the guards expected, but he never asked for forgiveness. Not from Jasmine, not from God. He went silent and alone. Jasmine started therapy. She finally said Monique's name without crying and her own without shame. Her therapist asked her, "Do you feel peace?" She replied, "Not yet, but I feel free." She started a blog called Monique's Voice. It was a safe space for survivors, stories, and healing. Within weeks, hundreds of women joined, and Jasmine finally felt like her sister's life had meaning again. Years later, a new pastor took over the same church. This time, it was a woman, a survivor. She preached not about perfection, but about grace, healing, and justice. Jasmine sat in the front row and finally bowed her head without fear. Justice is messy. Healing is slow. But truth is loud. Jasmine didn't get her sister back, but she gave her a voice. And in doing so, she gave herself one too.
3 months later, Jasmine received an email from a documentary producer. They had read her blog and wanted to tell Monique's story to the world. Jasmine hesitated at first, afraid of old wounds. But something in her whispered, "This time, you'll be telling it in your own voice." Filming began in the city where it all started. Jasmine walked the same streets Monique once did. The crew captured everything. The church, the courthouse, the cemetery. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. Meanwhile, Calvin's condition worsened behind bars. He refused treatment, choosing to suffer in silence. The guards said he rarely spoke, barely ate, but one day he asked for a Bible. Jasmine didn't feel pity, but she did feel something. She asked the crew to leave out his final days. "He doesn't get the last word," she said. "Monique does." The documentary premiered in New York City. Hundreds attended. Jasmine wore blue, Monique's favorite color. When the credits rolled, the room was silent. Then erupted into applause. She cried, not from sadness, but release.
A week later, Jasmine visited a high school to speak to young girls. She shared Monique's story without shame, just truth. One girl raised her hand and asked, "Do you think she's proud of you?" Jasmine smiled. "I know she is." In the prison hospital, Calvin breathed his last breath. He never apologized, never faced a courtroom, but he couldn't outrun the truth. It outlived him. Jasmine didn't attend the burial. She went to the beach, a place she and Monique once loved. She scattered wildflowers into the ocean. "Rest now," she whispered. "We're free." The blog became a nonprofit. Monique's Voice opened its first healing center in Atlanta. Survivors walked through its doors every day, and Jasmine made sure none of them ever felt alone again. Some stories end in silence, but Monique's story and Jasmine's began again in courage. Justice didn't look like jail cells or headlines. It looked like truth, healing, and legacy. News of the healing center spread fast across Atlanta. Churches, shelters, even schools began referring young women there. Jasmine partnered with counselors and lawyers to provide free services. For the first time, survivors had somewhere to run to, not from. Late one evening, Jasmine got a call from a girl named Keisha. She sounded scared, her voice trembling through the phone. "He's a preacher. He said no one would believe me." Jasmine clenched her jaw and said, "I believe you. Come in." Keisha arrived the next morning, eyes red, shoulders trembling. She had run away from a church camp in Alabama. Her story sounded eerily familiar. Jasmine's heart broke, but her resolve hardened. Keisha's abuser turned out to be another powerful preacher. He had friends in high places and deep pockets. When Jasmine contacted the authorities, they pushed back. But this time, she was ready, with lawyers, witnesses, and press. The preacher was arrested 3 weeks later. The media storm forced other victims to come forward. It was like a dam breaking, years of silence finally flooding out. Jasmine realized something. She hadn't just honored Monique, she had started a movement.
But victory wasn't always loud. Some nights, Jasmine still cried herself to sleep. She missed Monique's laugh, her cooking, her songs. Grief doesn't go away. It just walks with you in silence. One Sunday, Jasmine returned to the same church where it all began. But this time, she wasn't hiding. She walked down the aisle, wearing white, the color of peace, and she spoke. "This is no longer the house of a man. This is God's house." She ended her speech with Monique's name. She was kind, she was bright, and she was silenced too soon. The crowd stood up in a slow, reverent ovation, and somewhere deep inside Jasmine's spirit, Monique whispered, "Thank you." Jasmine walked out of that church a new woman, not because her pain was gone, but because she owned it. She didn't need to hide behind silence anymore. She was no longer a victim, she was a voice. And so Monique's story was no longer just a tragedy. It became a seed, one that bloomed into hope for thousands. Jasmine didn't just fight back, she lit a torch. And now, wherever there's a whisper of injustice, that light burns on. Years passed, but Jasmine never stopped. She launched a podcast called Voices That Rose. Survivors came to tell their truth without shame or fear. Each episode ended with the same words, "You are not alone." Then one day, she got an email from someone unexpected. The subject line read, "You saved my life." It was from a girl in Chicago who almost gave up until she heard Jasmine's voice. She was still alive because of a stranger's courage. The healing center was now nationwide, with branches in 5 cities, from Atlanta to Philly, from Detroit to Houston. Women ran them, survivors led them, and every wall had Monique's photo smiling down. At a women's conference, Jasmine was asked, "What gave you the strength to keep going?" She paused, smiled, and answered softly, "Loved it. Even in pain, love speaks louder." The whole room went silent, then broke into applause. They weren't clapping for Jasmine, they were clapping for every woman who rose. One day, Jasmine visited Monique's grave for the first time in years. She brought fresh lilies, her sister's favorite. As she knelt, she whispered, "You didn't die in vain." A warm wind swept past, like a heavenly hug. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something had shifted. Men in power were now held accountable. Girls in pain had spaces to speak and be believed, and the cycle of silence had been broken. Jasmine decided to take a break just for a while.
She rented a quiet cabin in the hills of Tennessee. No phones, no cameras, just her and God. There she finally found peace and sleep. In a dream, Monique came to her wearing white. She said nothing, just smiled and held Jasmine's hand. When Jasmine woke up, the tears weren't from pain anymore. They were from peace and release. She returned to Atlanta stronger than ever. And this time, she wasn't just a warrior, she was a guide. Girls called her Mama J, not just Jasmine. She had become what she once needed, a light. So if you ever feel voiceless, if your pain feels invisible, remember Jasmine, remember Monique, and remember this: your voice can shake mountains and light the sky. Thank you so much for watching this story till the end. If it touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs this message, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. Your support means everything.